The basis for our confusion. Chapter 12. The incoming NWO, Nazi World Order. We're finally at a point where we can understand all the psyops being perpetrated upon us. We can see them now and are beginning to see gleanings of where it all might be coming from. We've seen the brainwashing from our media, TV, music, and culture. We've identified that these industries weren't acting independently through our research into Operation Mockingbird. We were able to see that it's coming from the CIA. And I'd like to briefly point out that we can all agree that Mockingbird is still in effect, and the Twitter files show this. However, the CIA hasn't technically been implicated in the Twitter files directly, only the FBI, DHS, and DNI. Now, the DNI oversees the CIA, and so clearly, I believe that this is just a layer of CIA deception, protection, cover, etc. In fact, I'm going to claim that the members of the FBI and DHS who are meeting weekly with Twitter staff and, of course, other media organizations are CIA double agents. Or it may even be an open thing that they are working with the CIA, like in the case of Peter Strzok or Stork or whatever, who was the FBI counterintelligence liaison to the CIA. Look, folks, you either work for the CIA or you don't. And what I'm saying is that the CIA isn't going to defer to the FBI with regard to an operation of an employee. If an agent is going to liaison with the CIA and another agency, like we know Strzok did, the FBI counterintelligence agency working with the CIA, then the CIA is going to have dominion over that agent's work. And that's just the way it is, folks. And I believe that much more with regard to the CIA will be coming out shortly in these Twitter files eventually. Since its inception in 1947, the CIA, using the vast resources of the most successful country to ever have existed, has been able to grow into this hydra with its tentacles able to infiltrate into about any institution, government, corporation, or otherwise anywhere in the world. We aren't talking about some small presence within these organizations and governments, but instead we can see, based on the actions and messaging coming from such institutions, an almost full control over them. So much control that they're able to topple governments, dethrone kings and queens, and even kill U.S. presidents when they get in the way. Heck, I can count at least 15 color revolutions conducted by the CIA since the Philippines and Marcos in the 80s. But those are the sophisticated disinformation ones. These color revolutions, they're very subtle and sophisticated. The real spectacular moves by the CIA was the flipping of China from a nationalistic country into a Marxist one when the U.S. State Department, with the help of the brand new United States intelligence service known as the CIA, essentially put a death sentence on the controlling nationalistic government in China in the late 1940s when they decided to back the communist Mao, one of the first global actions taken by this newly formed state-of-the-art intel service. The story of the CIA begins in 1942 with the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA. Roosevelt understood that the U.S. was the only major world power without an intel service, so he sought out to create just that. Interestingly, it's openly reported that Roosevelt first contacted the British and met with the head of the MI6 Western Hemisphere Division, William Stevenson. Looks like a father of Pierce Morgan, if you look at their pictures. After meeting with Stevenson, Roosevelt commissioned a very connected Army veteran named Wild Bill Donovan to head up the creation of this new intel body. Bill Donovan is portrayed as a poor Irish kid who made a name for himself in the Army, and this may be true. However, this is only a very short period in his life and is not the full story. The truth is that Donovan is a Jesuit, just like his father before him, and he became an aristocrat early on in his life. After World War I, he married the daughter of the richest man in Buffalo, and this is where the real story of Wild Bill Donovan begins. He attended a Jesuit high school called Niagara High and attended law school at Columbia University with FDR. He stayed close to the Jesuits, making his main home in Jesuit-built Georgetown. Now, why do I keep mentioning the Jesuits? It's because the Jesuits are the ones who have been instrumental in the push for world domination and the push to take out America. I published a video that breaks this down in great detail. It's called The Communist Takeover of America Part 2 and can be found in the description. I'll leave you a link. Don't be confused by the name, as we know that there is a Nazi communist alliance currently at war with the world, and the previous chapter of this book goes into detail on that. But where are the Jesuits fitting in? Without going too deep into their history, the Jesuits ascended to power first via their control of information. The Jesuits were the archaeologists of the day, the scholars, the historians, the scientists, the scribes. And keep the scientists in mind. Scientists, folks, because we now know we are being pushed into a technocracy, and also understand the Nazis' obsession with science. We know that the Jesuits were instrumental and probably the main force behind the insurrection and subsequent civil war in America. Even Lincoln said as much. And the video in the description will go into fine details on that. We know that it was the Jesuits who invented communism in South America, where they set up communes with the local Guarani Indian tribes. They'd put the tribes to work making goods for the Jesuits to sell to the European markets while giving the local workers just enough to survive. Think of it. A whole swath of a country whose people you get to have work for you while you sell the fruits of their labor for high prices, allowing you to live in luxury while the workers get just enough. What a racket. Do you think they might want to do that on a world scale? Well, they're trying, folks. We also know that there is a Zionist connection with the Jesuits. We just don't know which side is controlling which. Is it the Jesuits controlling the Zionists, or is it the Zionists controlling the Jesuits? Either way, I think it's okay to consider the two synonymous with each other at this point. So when we see Karl Marx, the son of a rabbi, write his Communist Manifesto, it raises some eyebrows. We see him write his book in 1848 and immediately see anarchist riots break out in France. And then, about a decade later, we see them creating conditions in America that might begin to devolve her into anarchy. Do you think that this is a coincidence? Folks, I hate to break it to you, but the U.S. Civil War was an attempted communist takeover of America, plain and simple. The Zionist Jesuits created communism in order to take the U.S. After the Civil War didn't work, we see them successfully move to take another country, Russia, this time in 1918, after attrition from 2 years of World War caused the country to be stressed and fatigued. And the Bolsheviks made their move, and it wasn't pretty. And the rest is history. However, a commonly missed fact about all of this is that every single one of the main players, including Trotsky, were Jewish. The main brains, the main financing, and the main leadership, all Jewish. They changed their names, of course, to sound more non-Jewish, and this is all covered in the video. And now the Jesuits and Zionists had a whole country. But that's not enough, as we know that the goal of communism is world domination. They don't want just some small Indian tribe. No, they want this for the whole world. Real control, dear listeners. Absolute control. So with their newfound consolidation of a whole country now, with established infrastructure and industry, it was time to take the show on the road to China. And this is where the CIA comes into play. If you're reading this, you must understand that the British crown is controlled by the Zionists. In fact, the supposed royal family are Jews. They changed their names to hide it. It was in 1714, I believe. And just like the Bolsheviks changed their name. And we know that the OSS was created in consultation with the British CIA equivalent, MI6. The British crown was Zionist controlled at this time. And I know that it sounds confusing, but any good psyop it must be. In various videos and writings, I theorize that the whole goal of World War I and II was to get a hold of America, and with an isolation stance during the 30s and 40s, it was essential to get America involved in this conflict. And that's exactly what the Crown was able to do with the help of William Stevenson and MI6 and Churchill and the rest of them. And so I'm saying that right now that the UK is no friend to America. And in fact, the UK has been the main culprit with most of the problems in the world today, albeit they've deferred to their vassal state in America ever since the US was anointed the world's greatest superpower after the war. all done on purpose in order to exploit America's military prowess and have us do much of the dirty work in modern times. It's the new verse, same as the first. The U.S. simply took over as head instigator, head Zionist, Jesuit enforcer for the world. Enforcing democracy, it's good for you. America might seem to be the head Zionist sympathizer in town, but remember that America is only the military arm of the controllers, and while very powerful and intimidating, we know that London is the financial arm of these people, and we know that money is the main thing that powers it all. So we've got Jesuits, Zionists, Nazis, and communists. And how does this all fit together? Well, they're all the same thing now. All one large entity with one goal, to take down of America in order to plunge the world into the dark ages, but this time maybe forever. They're using Nazi tactics to do it all, and the end goal was clearly laid out by the Nazis. Folks, the war never ended. The Nazis are still fighting the U.S. and the rest of the world. The coming New World Order is their conception, Hitler's conception. It's the Nazi world order. They are able to do it primarily through their control of the CIA. The Jesuit Zionists either created the CIA or infiltrated it, maybe especially during Operation Paperclip after the war. The CIA may be the most powerful world that exists. The CIA, maybe the most powerful world body that exists, is ran by powerful players behind the scenes, folks. It may even be that the CIA does the dirty work of the highest bidder. And the almost unlimited funding and the ability for black projects, top secret national security stuff that allows it all to be kept secret. The infiltration, as we've seen with the Twitter files, has branched into other alphabet agencies in case you all didn't already know. And I'm saying that the CIA has double agents in the FBI and DHS and State Department and DOJ, etc., every one of the agencies. Not to mention the politicians, too. Either outright agents or controlled via blackmail rings like Jeffrey Epstein or Hugh Hefner. And this is how it's done, folks. In the coming chapters, we will try to identify who or what the powers are that are using the CIA as their communist Nazi Jesuit enforcement arm. Is it the Crown? Is it the Rothschilds? The descendants of the Pay-Sewers? One of the 13 bloodlines, as Fritz Springmeier says? Or some other powerful oligarch that not many on this planet have ever heard of? Chapter 13. If you can't beat them, join them. As we examine the global chessboard, we can see the emergence of an alliance involving the major political ideologies, Nazism and communism. We can see clearly that the world authoritative bodies pushing the globe towards an authoritarian dystopia using climate change as its reasoning. And when we listen to the main administrative arm of this future authoritarian dystopia, the WEF, we understand that this will be a technocracy, an authoritarian technocracy, using communist political and cultural tactics and using war criminal Nazi battle tactics upon the world, like a bioweapon, for instance. We know that the CIA is sort of the operational arm via operations like Mockingbird and MK Ultra and operations that topple governments, otherwise known as color revolutions. We concluded that if the Nazis and communist ideologies are utilizing the CIA as its enforcement arm, then the CIA must be under the control of the same people that created and pushed both Nazism and communism. So who are the people who are behind the emergence of these ideologies? To answer this, we need to take a quick look at the prevalent form of government over the last couple thousand years in this world. Emperors, kings, queens, the divine right to rule, a caste system, dictators, authoritarians. But getting away with it because they were appointed by God, or so they told their subjects. We find monarchs embedded into the stories of every single civilization that preceded us. The Romans were mostly governed via the emperor, and while they did eventually institute a republic, the republic was not very representative. In fact, the poor, or the plebs, were given in many areas no say whatsoever, and thus having the country essentially ran by oligarchs. While we all agree that it was the Greeks who invented democracy, what many don't know is that in many Greek city-states, other forms of government were employed, like monarchy, as in Macedonia, along with oligarchy and even tyranny, as the Greeks believed that a tyranny could be benevolent. As we can see, that divine right to rule is still very much at play, even within all of these past governments that we weren't necessarily taught about, as most people, when asked, will claim that the Greeks, for instance, were a solely democratic civilization, and this is very much untrue. Whether it's Hammurabi in Babylon or the pharaohs in Egypt, we see the divine right to rule in play whenever large groups of humans are being governed. But let's take a closer look at what was really going on around that time. These monarchies, many different ones, many with hidden ancestries, etc., these more modern kings and queens since the birth of Christ are different than the kings and queens from earlier times like Babylon. These despot monarchs, after around 325 AD, were merely spokes in a wheel, simply representatives for a greater body, the Roman Empire, answering to a greater authority, the Roman Emperor, in this case, Constantine. As the story goes, Constantine had a vision on the battlefield that made him repent and reject his pagan ways and to accept the one Lord and God in Jesus Christ. With this newfound mindset, Constantine brought Christianity to the Roman Empire. Now, it's a good story, but Constantine was a mystery school agent. He had been through the initiations, and his centralization of the church that followed at his Council of Nicaea really tells the true story of his and his controller's intentions. As it were, in those days, the story went that when the Roman emperor would put a blasphemous Christian to death, 10 more would arise. This movement of little fishes, as they were known back then, was a movement never before seen on earth and seemingly couldn't be stopped at this point. And so, as we've seen these people do time and time again, they infiltrate the movement, co-opt it, took control of it in order to navigate and sway its official stories, along with its future story. This is when Constantine went full commie and centralized the church teachings and the church itself all within Rome. And just like that, folks, a Roman emperor whose empire was dying and getting ready to be naturally replaced by something much better, morphs his power from the emperor into the papacy, transferring power from the emperor to the pope. This allowed the controllers to become what most of the world would call a benevolent dictator, a totalitarian almost, really, a leader elected via the other elite within the same organization. Not a democracy or any other representative leadership, but one selected from the selected. The corrupt papacy, it's a if you can't beat them, join them type of thing. It's what these parasitic controllers do and have done through their whole existence, as they are not creative, nor are they benevolent towards the good people of this earth, and thus must operate from the shadows in secret. So when we go back to these more recent royal European bloodlines, especially after the creation of the Holy Empire, we can now understand that these monarchs didn't have as much power as we thought. They had a higher authority that they answered to, the Pope, who was really just the new Roman emperor. So almost everything that the monarchs did was at the direction or approval of the Pope and to the benefit of the Vatican or the Roman Empire. Same thing. But as spoken about earlier, as the masses began to become more enlightened with regard to their reality, they began to organize and rise up. This continues into the beginning of the 18th century, when what became known as the Age of Enlightenment began. The Enlightenment produced numerous books, essays, inventions, scientific discoveries, laws, wars, and most importantly, revolutions. The main one being the American Revolution beginning in 1776, followed by the French a few years later. With the masses awakening, nations declaring independence, and kings being toppled, the world controllers of the day, the popes, the kings, and their associates and advisors behind the scenes knew that the whole divine right to rule scam had just about run its course. They needed a new idea. They had first intended to fight back after the death blow dealt to by the Americans in the late 1700s with continued proxy wars and battles, along with large battles again like 1812. But these bloodlines finally realized that this direct way would never be successful against such a strong democratic capitalist opponent. In this new world, one where the controllers have less control than they've ever had since their inception, they had to get creative. So after a revolution, a few proxy battles, another war against England directly in 1812, and a few more proxy battles, the powers behind the popes and crowns were preparing to lay out their new idea in 1848, only a few years after finally giving up on retaking America head-on via war. They indeed laid out this new idea, called the Communist Manifesto, written by a son of a rabbi named Karl Marx. This new idea was a direct concept of the controllers at the time, the same ones in control today and thousands of years before the writing of this book. And it's a direct reaction to, first, the decline of the divine right to rule scam, and secondly, a direct reaction to what the Americans had done in 1776. This was the idea to replace their racket of being appointed to rule the sheep via the consent of God. That one had bought them thousands of years of control, and this new one, using another deep-rooted human emotion, equality, mixed with a little anger, angry at the inequality, could allow them many more years of authoritarian rule as long as the conditions of unfairness, greed, and inequality continue to exist. Then this new idea will also have to continue to exist. Since the publishing of this book, we see France almost fall to it. A few years later, we see insurrection in the U.S., a civil war, 2 world wars, 2 large established countries falling into communism, Russia and China. And here we are today, ladies and gentlemen, in what appears to be one final assault, one last hurrah for it all, using communism as the political and cultural tool while using Nazism and top-secret science to implement and enforce it all.